Imagine this, a quiet suburban home. It's just an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, two kids, they burst through the front door, backpacks sliding off, calling out for their mother like they do every day. But this time, it's just silence. A really chilling silence. And what they find next, well, it completely shatters their world. It's their mother, brutally murdered in this horrific scene. And this is the truly chilling part. She's clutching strands of hair in both hands. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tell you about a really unsettling international criminal case. It's a story that actually crossed borders between England and Italy, and it stretched over years of cold leads, but also amazing forensic breakthroughs. It's a story that's really defined by this bizarre obsession, some incredibly meticulous police work, and just the relentless pursuit of justice ultimately for two victims.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission here really is to kind of peel back the layers of this gruesome story. We're going to look at the really unusual clues, the ones that baffled investigators for so long, and the surprising twist that kept the case going, And also how advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA, finally connected dots that seemed totally unconnected. It revealed a killer whose motives were, frankly, as twisted as his actions. We'll explore how seemingly small details, things like a missing house key or just a single strand of hair, how they can eventually lead detectives down this very dark path to a really terrifying truth.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Our journey into this really disturbing case begins on November 12th, 2002. We're in a coastal town in England, Bournemouth, and our focus is on Heather Barnett. She's a 48-year-old single mother. Heather, she was the heart of her small home, really. A dedicated seamstress working incredibly hard, surrounded by fabrics and patterns, just trying to provide for her two kids. She had a 14-year-old son, Terry, and an 11-year-old daughter, Caitlin. Neighbors knew her as quiet, hardworking, fiercely protective of her children, just that spirit of a single parent doing everything they can. So that afternoon, Terry and Caitlin, they come home from school. The house just felt wrong, eerily still. They called for their mom, but nothing. No answer. That awful feeling, starts to creep in. They looked around, living room, kitchen, no sign of her. It was actually Caitlin, the younger one, who just sensed something was terribly wrong. She went toward the bathroom door. It was closed. She called for Terry. And together, they pushed it open.
And what they saw? Well, it was a scene of just unspeakable horror. Heather's body was on the floor, surrounded by a massive amount of blood. When the police arrived, the initial scene was grim. Heather had severe head injuries, looked like they were from a hammer or something similar, struck maybe 7-8 times. But what really truly shocked even the seasoned investigators, what set this apart, was the gruesome mutilation. Both of her breasts had been cut off and placed deliberately near her head. This wasn't just brutality, it felt deeply personal, symbolic somehow.
That detail alone is just horrifying. But then you get to that really bizarre and ultimately crucial piece of evidence.
Yeah.
Heather's hands. They were clenched tight, and in each fist, she was holding strands of hair. Now, in one hand, it was her own hair. You could maybe explain that as part of a desperate struggle, right? But the other hand, it clutched this tightly wound roll or mass of unknown hair. It didn't look accidental. It just screamed of something staged, almost ritualistic. What did the police think of that immediately? Was it seen as just part of the fight or something weirder?
That's a really key question. Right away, investigators thought about the profound psychological disturbance behind an act like that. This wasn't your typical murder motive like robbery or a simple crime of passion. Beyond the horror, the initial crime scene analysis was vital. There were no signs of forced entry. So the killer either knew Heather, or she let him in, or maybe he had a key. The scene clearly showed a violent struggle, confirming Heather fought back hard, but what really intrigued them were these bloodied shoe prints. They led out of the bathroom, through the living room, and then they just stopped, abruptly. In Heather's study, where she worked, it strongly suggested the killer had taken off his bloody shoes and put on clean ones, which points to, chilling premeditation.
Wow. So the killer planned this right down to changing shoes. Were there other subtle clues? Things they found that might have been easy to miss at first?
Oh, definitely. They also found tiny synthetic fibers, likely from gloves the killer wore, again, reinforcing that idea of planning. But maybe the most vital piece, though they didn't know it fully yet, was a green hand towel. It was just draped over Heather's office chair. It had her blood on it, yes, but forensic teams painstakingly detected something else, 2 tiny particles of unknown sweat and skin, this sort of innocuous piece of cloth. It would become absolutely central to cracking the case, but its full significance wouldn't be clear for years.
Years, that's the key word here, isn't it? Because even with these clues piling up, DNA tech back in 2002, it wasn't what we have today.
Exactly right. In 2002, DNA profiling, especially STR analysis, was great for comparison. If you had a suspect, you could compare their DNA to a crime scene sample and get a match, usually with high certainty. But generating a full identifiable profile from just a few skin cells or sweat particles, trace DNA, and then running that through a database to find an unknown person when you had no suspect, that was still really difficult, almost impossible sometimes. So they had this crucial genetic material, but no one in their sights to match it to. It basically became a cold case almost immediately.
And the hair itself, the hair Heather was holding, what did the autopsy find out about that mysterious clump of hair?
Yeah, the autopsy findings on that unknown hair were just as puzzling and, frankly, chilling. It was long hair, definitely from another woman. Police started to theorize maybe the killer was a serial offender, collecting trophies, maybe hair from previous victims. And the idea that he might have forced Heather to hold her own hair alongside this other victim's hair, it suggested someone profoundly psychologically disturbed. It immediately raised that awful question. Was Heather Barnett his first victim? Or was there a dark history we didn't know about yet?
So the investigation's pushing forward, but it's tough.
Yeah.
Then the first real tangible lead comes from, well, the most innocent sources imaginable, Heather's own children. They remembered a small detail, something that seemed minor, but would eventually blow the case wide open.
Yes, that's right. They told the police that their mother's spare house key, it had gone missing, mysteriously vanished about a week before the murder. And then they mentioned a customer, a man who came over quite often for curtain orders she was making. And this customer, he was a neighbor, lived right across the street. This suddenly put a spotlight on someone very close by.
And this neighbor, we now know, was Danilo Restivo, an Italian man. He'd only moved to Bournemouth fairly recently, May 2002, with a girlfriend he met online. And here's a really bizarre, deeply unsettling part. He was the very person who came over to comfort Terry and Caitlin right after they found their mother. He even took them into his house while they waited for the police. The sheer nerve of it is almost impossible to grasp.
It is. Truly chilling. When the police first talked to Danilo, he gave them an alibi, claimed he was at a computer class when the murder happened. He even had bus tickets, class schedules, things that seemed to back up his story, initially anyway. But his behavior, his demeanor, it raised red flags straight away. He got really evasive when they asked to see his shoes, claiming he'd bleached them clean. Now, shoes didn't directly match those bloody prints at the scene, but the police strongly suspected he'd just swapped them. The whole story felt off. It didn't quite hold water.
And this is where the case just takes this dramatic international twist, right?
Right.
Because when the UK police did background checks on Danilo, liaising with Italian authorities, they uncovered something shocking from his past. Danilo Restivo, it turned out, had been the main suspect in the disappearance of a young woman back in 1993. Elisa Claps, in Potenza, Italy, a case where her body had just vanished. For years, it was one of Italy's biggest mysteries. This connection suddenly cast Danilo in a much darker light.
And then came the absolutely crucial, almost unbelievable piece of information from Italy. The Italian police confirmed Danilo Restivo had a documented history as they sometimes called it a hair fetishist. It's a specific paraphilia, a sexual obsession, a compulsion really to collect women's hair. For someone with this condition, the sight, the collection, even just cutting hair can be intensely sexually arousing. This was the missing link. The terrifying piece that connected his past behavior directly to that deeply unsettling detail, the hair clutched in Heather's hands. Suddenly, that bizarre act of placing hair in her hands. It made a kind of horrific, perverse sense.
Okay, so the suspicion is incredibly strong now. You've got the missing key, the proximity, the dodgy alibi, this Italian case, and now this horrifying fetish connection. But still, direct forensic proof linking him to Heather's murder specifically that was still missing. So in 2004, the police make a big decision. They put Danilo under close surveillance. What were they hoping to find, and what did they actually see?
Well, it's a tough job, surveillance. Painstaking, often frustrating, watching someone constantly hoping for a slip-up. The goal was to catch him doing something suspicious, ideally something linked to the fetish or indicating violence. And during the surveillance, they did see some very odd behavior. They saw him lurking in parks, often dressed really strangely for the weather, like wearing a hooded sweatshirt, gloves, even waterproof pants when it was warm. He just seemed to be stalking people, watching them intensely. But he never actually attacked anyone while they were watching. He was just there, waiting, watching. A really unsettling presence.
That surveillance went on for months, right? Shows how suspicious they were. Then on May 12, 2004, the police decide to intervene directly. They stopped him using a false reason, something about a car theft investigation.
Yeah.
What did they find in his car? And why couldn't they hold him then?
Yeah, they engineered a stop. And inside his car, they found a truly chilling collection of items. A full head mask, like a balaclava, cloth gloves, scissors, wet wipes, and a large knife. I mean, it looked like a predator's kit, frankly. But Danilo, he was remarkably calm, collected, had an innocent explanation for everything, claimed he'd found the knife in the park, said he loved nature, caught insects for his pet lizard, hence the gloves maybe. The other stuff, just normal car things, he said, with no direct evidence of a crime happening right then, no victim, and these plausible, if suspicious, explanations. Their hands were tied. They couldn't hold him. It must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators.
So he walks free again, despite everything pointing towards him. And years start to pass. Heather's murder is still unsolved, just this constant pain for her family and the police. But then, this is where science really steps up, isn't it? Forensic technology starts to catch up. By 2007, DNA tech was getting better.
Absolutely. By 2007, the methods for extracting and analyzing DNA had become much more sensitive. This meant forensic scientists could now try something new with that unknown hair from Heather's hand. Using advanced mitochondrial DNA analysis, which is good for hair shafts that often lack nuclear DNA, they could actually trace the hair to a specific UK city. A geographical link, finally. But frustratingly, even with that city identified, they couldn't find the owner of the hair. She wasn't in any database, couldn't be located, so the case was still cold, but maybe, lukewarm. They had a piece, but not the whole picture.
Okay, so closer, but still no definitive suspect ID from the hair. But science kept marching on. What was the real breakthrough? The one that finally connected the dots and pointed directly at Restivo.
Right. It was by 2009 that DNA technology had taken another huge leap forward. So the forensics team decided to go back to that green hand towel, the one found at the scene years ago, with Heather's blood, but also those faint traces of sweat and skin. Using these much more refined techniques, the experts painstakingly managed to separate Heather's blood DNA from the other DNA, those minuscule skin and sweat particles embedded deep in the fabric. And when they tested that other DNA profile, bingo! It was a definitive, irrefutable match to Danilo Restivo. The chance it wasn't him was something like 1 in 57,000. This wasn't just circumstantial anymore. This was solid, scientific proof placing him right there.
Wow. And the final nail in the coffin, forensically speaking, It came from his sneakers, didn't it? The ones he claimed he bleached.
Exactly. Those sneakers. Remember, their soles didn't match the distinct bloody prints at the scene, which is why they were initially sort of dismissed as the killer's shoes. Maybe he had swapped them. But now, with this ultra-sensitive DNA tech, investigators could look inside the shoe. And there, likely transferred from his socks after walking through the blood, they found Heather Barnett's DNA. This just sealed it. It wasn't just trace evidence on a towel anymore. It unequivocally put Danilo Restivo at the scene, directly involved in Heather's murder.
So the net is finally closing in the UK. And then just as this is happening comes this absolutely shocking development from Italy.
Yeah, it's incredible timing, really. On March 17th, 2010, back in Potenza, Italy, they were doing renovations at the Church of the Most Holy Trinity, the very church where Elisa Claps was last seen alive 17 years earlier. And hidden in the attic, workers found her body, mummified after all those years. The discovery just sent shockwaves across Italy. The autopsy confirmed Elisa had been violently attacked, and crucially, just like Heather Barnett, she also had strands of hair clutched in her hands. Furthermore, Danilo's DNA was found on her body. This was despite an initial test back in the 90s coming back negative from an expert who was later suspended for negligence, which is suspicious in itself. The link between the two murders across countries, across decades, was now undeniable. The horrifying truth was laid bare.
So with all this evidence, Danilo Restivo was finally arrested in the UK, May 19, 2010, and justice followed. He was convicted of Heather Barnett's murder in the UK on June 30th, 2011. Got a life sentence, though that was later reduced to 40 years minimum on appeal. And then separately, in Italy, on November 11th, 2011, he was convicted for Elisa Claps's murder too, receiving a 30-year sentence there. Finally, justice for both women, closure for families who had waited so long.
But even with those convictions, this whole tragic story leaves you with a really chilling, persistent question. Could Danilo Restivo actually be a serial killer? Were there more victims? Investigators certainly thought about it. They looked into other cold cases, and one in Bournemouth stood out because of striking similarities. Back in July 2002, just a few months before Heather's murder, a Korean student named Oki was attacked and stabbed just blocks from where Danilo lived. Oki survived, thankfully, and she told police her attacker wore a full head mask, very similar to the one found in Danilo's car later. And guess what? Hair was also found at that crime scene. Now, Danilo was never charged in Oki's case, not enough direct evidence linking him. But the parallels, they're undeniable, really disturbing. It suggests this pattern, this dark obsession was playing out repeatedly, leaving terror in its wake even before Heather was killed.
This deep dive into the case of Danilo Restivo, the so-called haircut killer, it's just a powerful story, isn't it? It shows incredible persistence from law enforcement, but also the truly transformative power of forensic science, especially DNA. It really came of age during this investigation, didn't it? Bringing justice after years, even decades, of agonizing uncertainty. It's amazing how investigators working across borders over such a long time finally managed to piece together this incredibly complex web of lies, deceit, and just horrific obsession.
Yeah, it really is. In this case, it forces you to think, doesn't it? Not just about the depths people can sink to, but also about the hidden lives, the secret obsessions that can be lurking just beneath the surface. Right there in plain sight, maybe even among people you think you know, like your neighbors. It makes you wonder what other secrets are still buried out there, waiting for maybe new technology or just one determined detective to finally bring a hidden truth into the light.
Well, if this story has sparked your curiosity, or maybe left you with more questions about how these complex investigations work and how science really can change everything in cold cases, then that's exactly what we aim for here. Thank you so much for joining us on this really unsettling journey into the facts today. And if you found this interesting, please do consider liking this, sharing it with others who might be interested, and subscribing to our channel Horror Doc for more deep dives into chilling cases. We appreciate your support. Thank you for listening.